My name is Tammy Forrester. I'm 32 years old. Until a few weeks ago, I believed I was only 6 weeks away from marrying the man I loved. We had spent 4 years building a life together, 14 months planning our wedding, and nearly every conversation revolved around the future we were certain we'd share. His parents had contributed $35,000 toward the ceremony. Mine had added another $15,000. I had personally spent around $12,000 more on everything from vendors to decorations because I wanted our wedding to be something we'd remember forever. Looking back now, I realize I was investing in a dream that only one of us still believed in. Things hadn't been perfect for months. We weren't constantly arguing, but something between us had slowly gone quiet. My fiancé, Daniel Whitmore, no longer smiled when we talked about the wedding. Every planning session felt like an obligation to him. He answered questions with shrugs, forgot appointments with vendors, and brushed off conversations about our honeymoon. Whenever I asked what was wrong, he blamed work, stress, exhaustion, anything except the truth. I wanted to believe him, because believing him was easier than imagining the alternative. 2 months before the wedding, I suggested couples therapy. I wasn't trying to fix a broken relationship. I honestly believed we were simply struggling with communication before a major life change. Daniel resisted at first, insisting we were just dealing with normal pre-wedding nerves. Eventually he agreed, mostly because I refused to let our silence become permanent. By the time of our fourth session, I thought we were finally making progress. The conversations had stayed polite, almost too polite, touching only the surface of what we both felt. That afternoon, however, our therapist changed her approach. She leaned forward and spoke gently, encouraging us to stop protecting each other with half-truths. "I'd like each of you," she said, "to share something you've been holding back because you're afraid of the other person's reaction." I volunteered to speak first. My voice trembled as I admitted what had been weighing on me for months. I confessed that I felt Daniel had emotionally disappeared from our relationship. I told him I missed the excitement we once shared, and asked whether he still wanted the life we'd planned together. I wasn't accusing him. I was pleading for reassurance. Then it was his turn. He stared at the floor for what felt like forever. The silence grew so heavy that even breathing sounded loud inside the room. I kept waiting for him to tell me he was overwhelmed, scared, or simply burned out. Instead, he finally whispered words that shattered everything I'd believed. "I've been unhappy for years," he said quietly. "The only reason I'm still here in this relationship, in therapy, and going through with this wedding is because my parents already paid for everything. I couldn't back out after they invested so much." For several seconds, I couldn't even process what I'd heard. The therapist's expression changed instantly. Throughout every previous session, she'd remained professionally calm. But this time, even she looked stunned. I forced myself to speak. "What? How did you just say?" Daniel didn't take the words back. "You asked for honesty," he replied. "I've known for at least 2 years that something wasn't right. I kept hoping my feelings would change. I thought if I stayed committed long enough, maybe getting married would make everything feel real." The room suddenly felt impossibly small. "So you've known this since before we got engaged?" I asked. He nodded without meeting my eyes. "I tried," he insisted. "I never wanted to hurt you." I could barely hear him anymore. "You accepted my proposal," I whispered. "You let me spend 2 years planning a future that you already knew you didn't want. I hoped I'd feel differently. You hoped a wedding would fix the fact that you didn't want to marry me? I never said I didn't love you." I looked at him for a long moment before quietly answering. "Someone who stays only because of money isn't choosing love." The therapist tried to slow the conversation, suggesting we pause and explore the emotions underneath his confession. But there was nothing left for me to explore. Everything suddenly made sense. The distance, the excuses, the empty conversations, the forced smiles every time someone mentioned our wedding. I asked him one final question. "If your parents hadn't spent $35,000, would you leave today?" He didn't answer. He didn't have to. Silence told me everything. I stood up. My hands were shaking, but my mind had never been clearer. I pulled out my phone. Daniel frowned. Tammy, what are you doing? I'm removing the only reason you said you're still here. I searched for his mother's number and pressed call. The therapist watched silently as the phone rang. Daniel reached toward me but stopped himself halfway. His mother answered after only a few rings. Hello, Tammy? Is everything all right? I switched the phone to speaker. I'm calling from our therapy session, I said calmly. Daniel just told me he's only continuing with this wedding because you and your husband already paid for it. I'd like you to know that I'll personally reimburse every dollar you've spent, every deposit, every payment, every expense. The wedding is officially canceled. The room fell completely silent. Silence lingered on the speakerphone long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Daniel looked as though he couldn't believe I'd actually done it. His mouth opened, but no words came out. Finally, his mother spoke. What did you just say? I kept my voice steady despite the ache building in my chest. Daniel told me he's been unhappy for years. He said the only reason he stayed with me and continued planning this wedding was because you and your husband had already invested so much money. I don't want him feeling trapped by your generosity anymore. I'll reimburse every dollar you've spent. I heard her inhale sharply. $35,000, she said quietly. I know, I replied. I'll write you a check this week. Daniel deserves the freedom to make the decision he actually wants without feeling guilty about the money. Daniel suddenly leaned toward the phone. Mom, that's not. Be quiet, she interrupted, her voice firmer than I'd ever heard it. I'm talking to Tammy. Even our therapist seemed frozen. After a long pause, his mother spoke again, each word measured. Are you telling me my son has been pretending he wanted this marriage for 2 years? That he's been lying to you and to us? Daniel rubbed both hands across his face. I wasn't lying. Then, what would you call it? She shot back. Your father and I emptied savings because we believed you were happy. We've spent more than a year planning this wedding. Family members are flying in from 3 different states. And now I'm hearing you've known since before the engagement that you didn't want to get married? Mom, please. No. Her disappointment carried far more weight than anger. I raised you to have difficult conversations, Daniel. If you were unhappy, you should have told Tammy before proposing, before deposits, before invitations, before everyone built their lives around a wedding you weren't sure about. Tears rolled down Daniel's face. Seeing him cry hurt more than I expected. 4 years of loving someone doesn't disappear in a single afternoon. Part of me still wanted to hold his hand, to tell him we'd figure something out together. But another part of me finally understood that I had been fighting for a future only I believed existed. His mother spoke one last time. I need to call your father. This conversation isn't finished. Tammy, I'm so sorry. Then the line went dead. The office became painfully quiet. Daniel stared at me with red, exhausted eyes. You didn't have to do that. I looked back at him. I didn't do it to punish you. You humiliated me. No, I answered softly. The truth did. The therapist gently suggested we all sit down again, reminding us that enormous emotions often lead people to make permanent decisions in temporary moments. I appreciated her kindness, but this wasn't temporary. I turned toward Daniel. I meant what I said. Your parents shouldn't lose their savings because you couldn't tell me the truth. I was trying, he whispered. You were pretending. I thought my feelings would change. They've had 2 years. He lowered his head. I realized then that I wasn't angry because he had fallen out of love. People can't control that. I was angry because he had stolen my ability to choose. Every anniversary, every wedding payment, every conversation about children, every promise about forever had been built on information he already knew but refused to share. You kept saying, I love you, I said quietly. Now I can't stop wondering how many times you said it, hoping one day it would become true. He didn't answer. That silence hurt more than any argument ever could. I picked up my purse. The therapist asked whether we'd like to schedule another appointment to continue processing everything. I offered a small, exhausted smile. I think today's session gave me all the clarity I needed. Without waiting for another response, I walked out of the office. The hallway felt strangely bright after everything that had happened. By the time I reached my car, my legs were shaking so badly, I had to lean against the driver's door, just to stay upright. I didn't cry, immediately. Instead, I drove aimlessly for nearly an hour, until I found myself sitting alone in an almost empty parking lot. The engine was off. My phone buzzed nonstop on the passenger seat. Daniel, his sister, my parents, his parents, friends asking if everything was okay. I couldn't answer any of them. I finally sent one short text to my parents. "The wedding is over. I'll explain later." Then I turned the phone face down and stared through the windshield. It wasn't just my engagement that had ended. The home we'd talked about buying, the children we'd named, the vacations we'd planned, the retirement we'd imagined. Every version of my future had disappeared in a single therapy session because the man I trusted most had finally admitted the truth he'd been hiding for years. I sat there until sunset, trying to understand how someone could stay beside you every day, while quietly deciding they no longer wanted the life you were building together. 3 days passed before I felt capable of answering more than a few messages. The first real conversation I had was with my parents. My mother cried almost the entire time as I explained what had happened inside the therapist's office. My father listened quietly before saying something that stayed with me. Better to lose money now than spend the rest of your life with someone who never truly chose you. It didn't erase the pain, but it helped me breathe. The next morning I received an unexpected text from Daniel's father. "Can we meet?" Just the two of us. We met at a small coffee shop halfway across town. He looked exhausted, as though he'd aged 10 years in only a few days. After sitting down, he didn't even bother opening the menu. "I'm not here to convince you to take Daniel back," he began. I nodded silently. "I'm here because my wife told me everything. Tammy, I'm ashamed." "You don't owe me an apology." "Yes, I do." His voice cracked. "My wife and I believed we were helping our son build a happy future. Instead, we unknowingly helped him trap both of you in a relationship he should have ended years ago." I didn't know what to say. He continued, "You offered to repay every dollar we spent. I meant it. I know you did." He shook his head. "And that's exactly why I won't accept it." I frowned. "Daniel made this choice, not you. You shouldn't carry the financial consequences of his dishonesty." He paused before adding quietly, "Sometimes $35,000 is cheaper than learning the truth after a marriage." That sentence stayed with me long after we left the cafe. For the first time since everything collapsed, I felt seen. Unfortunately, peace didn't last long. That same afternoon, someone knocked on my apartment door. Daniel. I should have ignored it. Instead, I opened the door just enough to see his face. "We need to talk." "I don't think we do." "You embarrassed me." I almost laughed at the irony. "I embarrassed you? You called my mother in front of our therapist. You told me you'd been pretending to want this marriage for 2 years. I was finally being vulnerable." "No," I replied calmly. "You were confessing." His jaw tightened. "I never said I didn't love you. You said the only reason you stayed was because your parents had already spent the money." I was confused. "You accepted my proposal while confused. I thought things would change. You let me spend 2 years planning our future while waiting for feelings that never came." His shoulders slumped. For a moment, I thought he might finally apologize without excuses. Instead, he asked quietly, "What am I supposed to tell everyone now?" "Our relatives. My friends. The people coming to the wedding." I looked at him in disbelief. "Tell them the truth." "I can't." "Then make something up." He stared at me. "I've spent years protecting your feelings, Daniel. Your reputation isn't my responsibility anymore." He stood there another few seconds before leaving, without another word. Over the next several days, my phone became a battlefield. His sister accused me of destroying their family. Several of his friends insisted I had overreacted to one therapy session. Others claimed every couple gets scared before marriage. None of them had been sitting in that room. None of them had heard him admit he'd wanted out for 2 years. I stopped defending myself. People determined to misunderstand rarely change their minds. Then something happened I never expected. A call came from an unfamiliar number. It was Daniel's cousin. "I probably shouldn't be telling you this," she said nervously. "Telling me what?" "What Daniel admitted during therapy." I waited. It wasn't the first time. Every muscle in my body froze. "What do you mean?" "He told several family members months ago that he wasn't sure about the wedding." My stomach dropped. "He told me at Easter." "He told his sister." "He even mentioned it to our aunt." I couldn't believe what I was hearing, so— "People knew?" she sighed. "Not everyone, but enough. They all assumed he just had cold feet, and nobody thought maybe I deserved to know?" Silence. Finally, she whispered, "I'm sorry. So was I the only person who didn't know my own relationship was ending?" "Yes." After hanging up, I sat alone in my apartment for nearly an hour without moving. That realization hurt even more than Daniel's confession. For months, maybe longer, I had been the last person living inside a relationship that everyone else already knew was dying. I wasn't grieving only the loss of my fiancé anymore. I was grieving the realization that the future I'd loved had existed only in my imagination.